and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I wanted to film a video that's sort of a part 2 to my autism assessment and diagnosis process. I've wanted to film this for so long, but to be quite honest, I did not have the mental capacity for it. I didn't have the brain power to sit here and talk about the trauma that my diagnosis process put me through. I was diagnosed 6 months ago, so it was May, yeah. June, July, August, September, October. 5 or 6 months ago. It's been a long time, and I needed to decompress, and I needed some time to not talk about it because I was just relaying it to so many different people. This happened, this happened, this happened. Having to tell people, talking about it online, getting questions. I just needed a break from it. But I really want to make this video because I think it'll be helpful. I have a part 1, which was everything that happened leading up to my assessment, so sort of that 2 years that I waited until hearing, the 6 months preliminary assessments that I would have where they would catch up with me, the questions that they asked me, the questionnaires that I had to fill in, things like that. But this video is going to be about the 2 assessments that I had. I'm going to try and whiz through the first one quite quickly because that one wasn't really the issue. That one was actually perfectly fine and I was very happy when I walked away from that one. It was the second one and all of the things that came in between that were the real issue. Yeah, so I'm just going to talk through it. I hope that it helps, and let me know if you have any questions because I would love to answer them. Okay, so my first assessment, like I said, I'm going to try and whiz through this and not make it take too long. I had a lovely guy do my assessment. I felt very comfortable the entire time, and it basically was just the stereotype of what you'd assume an autism assessment was going to be. It was basically just very, very simple. I had the frog book, I had bring a load of things along and make a story out of it and answer a load of questions. So, first off, he asked me sort of what I do in my life, and then said something like, tell me about something that brings you a lot of joy, something that you might be really interested in and how it makes you feel. And then he asked a lot of questions about, tell me what it feels like to be sad, tell me what it feels like to be lonely, tell me what it feels like to be angry, and sort of how I recognise that in myself. So he was asking a lot about my emotions and whether I understood them or not, and then he would tie back to sort of things that I'd mentioned about myself. So he would say things like, so you said that you work here and here, what is it like when this happens? So for example, I work in a theatre, and he said, what's it like when you might get a group of kids in? And then he would use that to ask me questions about things like my sensory issues, and he was very good at allowing me to talk about the things that bothered me and the things that I struggled with without specifically asking me. So he'd be like, tell me about work and what you struggle with, and then it would allow me to tell him about the things that, in terms of being autistic, I struggled with, and I felt like I got a lot across. And yeah, it made me feel very secure. It made me feel like, oh right, this is going in a direction where I feel comfortable. And prior to the assessment, I got sent a list of things that I had to take along. So it was like a list of 11 different items, things like string, a straw, a piece of cutlery, a miniature toy, sponge, a matchstick, things like that. And I had to bring along 7 of them in like a clear plastic bag or something. And he essentially said, I want you to make a story out of it. And this was hard. This was very, very hard. And a lot of people say, like, what's the point in that? And I think there's multiple reasons why they do it. It's one, to watch how you react to being asked to do something that has essentially no rules, but also a rule that doesn't really make sense, and sort of how you respond to being asked a question that's a little bit odd. And then it's also tying back to that stereotype that autistic people don't have an imagination or understand how to give characters emotions, and it's also about how you either use the objects as they are or turn them into something else through imagining things. And I found this so hard because I just had a bunch of random fucking objects. Like, I decided to use the string, put the little doll that I had at the end, and light it on fire with a matchstick. And oh my god, what's going to happen? She's going to burn because the string's setting on fire. And then I had a piece of sponge and I was like, imagine the sponge is wet. Oh, it's being dropped on the string. It's put the fire out. She's not going to die. Woo! And I think I had like a party popper or something and I was like, woo, celebration. And it was just really weird. And I you don't know what they want from you. And I could tell that I was so awkward. And then a similar question that I got was the frog book. I think the frog book is called Tuesday. I want to say that it's called Tuesday, but maybe it's not. Maybe I've made that up. But it's essentially this book that he didn't have. He had printouts of it. And my assessment was done over Zoom. I probably should have pointed that out, that it wasn't in person. He had to like hold this sheet of paper up to the camera and be like, tell me about this story, like what are you seeing? And it's essentially some frogs on some lily pads that then start floating upwards and like float towards this log where there's a tortoise, I think, is sat on it. And he's like, tell me the story. And again, I think this is a similar thing of like, do you create a story or do you just describe what you see? And I found this so uncomfortable. Like, I was stuttering over my words. I didn't know what to say. Because what can you say? Like, it's the most random story picture book. It's got no words on it. It's just pictures. It was so random. I felt so uncomfortable. It was just odd. It was just really weird. And I think he could tell that I was uncomfortable. And one thing that he did really well was he always reassured me. He was always like, you're doing fine. Like, you're doing great. I'm getting everything I need from you, which was so reassuring to hear because I was so anxious the entire time that I wasn't getting across things that I needed to be getting across. And my worry was, oh my god, I'm not going to get diagnosed at the end of this. But he made me feel really great. And that probably lasted about an hour and a half, that assessment. It was about 90 minutes. I had a break in between. Yeah, and he was just writing notes the entire time and sort of would chime back on things that I was saying. So it allowed me to get things across that he clearly recognised were important to my diagnosis. And yeah, he talked me through what the next process would be, and it left me feeling reassured and on a bit of a high. But let me tell you, that didn't last long. That did not last long. It took, I want to say, about 2 weeks before I got a phone call to book in my next appointment. And my first assessment was the end of January. Then I got a phone call to be like, when do you want to book your next assessment in? And I think it got booked for the beginning of April. So this whole process took a long time. And this is where it got bad. So I got my assessments through Clinical Partners, which I didn't know was happening. It was through the Right to Choose pathway. However, I didn't know that I was on the Right to Choose pathway because they didn't tell me this. I didn't know that I wasn't having an NHS assessment until they contacted me. And for one, really scary, because as an autistic person, I went 2 years thinking that it was going to be done in one way to find that it was going to be done in a completely different way. And Clinical Partners do things slightly differently to the NHS. And I essentially got a phone call from them saying, can you let us know who your informant is going to be? And I was like, oh, I didn't think I was going to bring anybody along. I know you said you needed one, but I don't have the family dynamic of having someone there that knows what they're talking about. And they were like, well, you need someone there because you can't be there. And I said, I'm sorry. And they said, you can't go. And I was like, but it's my autism assessment. And they said, well, all kids take somebody, like, have somebody that does it for them. And I was like, I'm 22. And she was like, oh, I'm sorry. She thought that I was a child. She thought I was a child. She did not realise that she was calling up an adult. And I was like, one, I'm pretty sure you have to do a security check when you ring anybody about like things like this, of checking my date of birth. And two, surely you should just know whether you're dealing with adult patients or kids. Like, that made me feel so uncomfortable. And then I was like, what do you mean I can't go? And they said, well, it's not standard practice for you to be at the assessment, it's for your informant. And I said, I was never told this. And whilst a lot of people thought that this was normal when I was talking about it because this is what happened to them, my issue was that this was not clearly said to me, because when I when I put myself forward for an assessment through the NHS, I was always allowed to go. So I always assumed I was allowed to go, because with the NHS I would have been. But that's not how clinical partners do it. And a lot of other places do it that way, which one, I think is really weird, and two, they didn't tell me. And that was my issue. I'm autistic. Obviously that was very stressful. And I said, I don't have anyone. And they said it just needs to be a family member. And I said, my mum said no, because she does not feel comfortable. She just said, I don't know what to tell them. I don't know how to answer the questions that you have suggested they might ask. And my dad, whilst he was going to do it, he said that he didn't feel comfortable and didn't know what they wanted from him. And my family dynamic is not I'm close to my parents, but not in a way where they would ever understand me being autistic. I mean, I was the one that realised it. If they had saw autistic traits in me, I would have been diagnosed as a child. They would have realised that I was autistic as a child, and they didn't. So of course, they're not going to know what they're doing. And again, I'm not necessarily close to them. I'm very masked around my parents. So if they were to be asked a question of, do you see this trait in Ella, they're going to say no. And I panicked, because I was like, this is going to mean that I'm not going to get diagnosed, because I have no one. I don't have anybody that would be able to go, who's known me from a younger age, that is going to be able to vouch for me and the things that I do. So I was just like, look, I was told I could be my own informant. Why are you treating me like a child, and why are you not explaining things to me properly? And they just kept saying, it's not standard practice, it's not standard practice. And I just said, yes, I know, but what do you do when someone is completely alone, when someone has no family, when someone has no friends? How do they get an autism assessment with you? And they said, oh, well, they do it themselves. And I was like, right, why can't I do that myself? And they just said, right, we'll get in touch with the psychologist and see what he says. And eventually they said that I could go, and I just felt like an imposter the entire time at my own autism assessment. I cannot fathom who the hell came up with this, that you cannot go to your own autism assessment. And I know that everybody's dynamic is different. I know that everybody's situation and sort of referral process is different. But if somebody says that they want to be there, and if somebody says, this is not going to work with my family member, why are you not listening to them? And eventually they said yes, but it also meant that my assessment, the person that did my assessment, he made me beyond uncomfortable. The first thing that he said, he didn't say hello, he didn't welcome us both onto the call, because again it was over Zoom. He was like, I just want to say that this isn't standard practice and I'm not happy that you're here. And obviously, first impressions was, I'm uncomfortable now. And this was a 2.5 hour assessment on Zoom with my dad. I took my dad because my mum said she wasn't comfortable with it, and I basically just said to my dad, this is what they're going to ask you, this is the thing, and I'm going to chime in when I need to, because there were questions that came up that my dad was saying, no, Ella doesn't do that, and I was like, no, I do that, important questions that I'll get to. If I wasn't there, I don't think I would have got diagnosed. I really wholeheartedly do not believe that I would have got my diagnosis if I was not at that appointment, because half of the information that he got came from me. And I think that's really scary, really, really scary, and just shows how backwards a lot of the system is, because for a lot of people who were in similar situations to me would have felt exactly the same. And the first question that he asked to my dad was, what was Ella like as a child? And my dad just went on his ramblings, because he does, and started talking about what I was like as a child. I think it's gone really dark. I'm hoping the lighting is okay. And then he would ask things like, when did Ella learn to speak? When did Ella learn to walk? And I am not kidding. For an hour and 15 minutes of this assessment, bearing in mind I said that this was a 2.5 hour assessment, an hour and 15 minutes, he spent talking about when I learned to talk, which is important. I'm not going to say that it's not important, because it is, but he asked the same question over and over and over and over and over again about when did Ella learn to speak, when did Ella do this as a child, and it was literally just all focused on things that I would say and whether my development was hindered or not. And he kept trying, it was like he was trying to bait my dad into saying Ella was like slowly developed as a child, didn't learn to speak until later than most people, didn't learn to walk until later than most people. I could speak at 9 months. I could walk at 9 months, and by the time I was 2, I could have full-on conversations with most people. I developed in terms of speech and walking a lot faster than most people, which is very, very common in autistic people, especially for non-boys. For people who are not men, it is very, very common. And he sort of was like, interesting, yeah, that's not usual, and then would write it down, and I was like, fuck! Like, this is... Everything he was saying and everything he was doing made me feel like he was just trying to find ways of being like, you don't fit the stereotypes, and it made me so uncomfortable. And a lot of people are like, oh, but if a professional's saying that you're not autistic, then you have to believe them. This assessment was backwards. This assessment was done in such a biased, cis white boy way, which obviously I am not. And I was sat there the entire time, I was fidgeting, and it was just so uncomfortable. And then eventually, when he got off the topic of my fast developed speech, he went on to talk about whether I was creative or not, whether I liked maths or not. And my dad was like, Ella's a very creative person, very creative, has always been creative, used to do all of these things. Whenever we were in social situations, I would just be off in the corner making things, drawing things. I would pick up a load of things from the kitchen, take them upstairs, and then come back down half an hour later and have made something really strange. And he was like, so what you're saying is she's not a very creative person. And I was just like, is he listening to anything that my dad is saying? And then he just kept being like, is she good at maths? Is she good at maths? Is she good at maths? And I was like, they know that my pronouns are they, them, firstly. And second, they were trying to put me in a stereotype box. And my dad was like, well, Ella's always been like intelligent in terms of school subjects, and I was always excelling in most of my classes, but like maths was never a special interest or like a massive strong point where I was above other people. And it was just really odd. Like, I felt like his questions were very baity and very trying to trip me up or trip my dad up into... I don't feel like he was looking for reasons as to why I was autistic, but more reasons as to why I wasn't, which maybe is standard, but he was doing it in a way that made me very uncomfortable. And he was patronising, he was belittling, he made me feel like I was wasting his time. And he said, what did he say? Yeah, at the end of the assessment, I said to him, because I was so worried, I said to him, what do I do if you don't give me a diagnosis? Can I question you on that? And he was like, why would you want to? And I was like, well, like, if you say that I'm not autistic, what do I do? Like, because I know that I am. And he was sort of like, I don't understand why you would want that. And I was like, this man is a professional. This man works with autistic people. This man is in a professional space, and he is saying to my face, why would I even want to be autistic? And the insinuation of that, the implications around what he was saying made me feel sick. And he went, let me just say something to you. Autism is a spectrum. And he went like this. And he was like, you're either at one end or the other. And whilst some people out and about might tick some boxes, it doesn't mean that everybody is on it, okay? You're just a little bit weird. And whilst everybody might have autistic traits in there a little bit, not everybody is enough to be on it. And I was like, I was so confused by what he was saying, because whilst he was saying not everybody's autistic, he did make it seem like he was saying everybody is a little bit autistic, but not everybody is enough autistic to get a diagnosis. Bloody camera cut out, didn't it? But anyway, she was like, I can speak to him, but there's nothing you can do. So I rang up the NHS place that deals with like autism referrals, and I was like, look, I've had this, because essentially they sent me to clinical partners, the NHS, to do my assessments, and then they fed it back. So I rang up the NHS and I was like, look, the place that's doing my assessment, I've had a really bad experience here, and they're saying that there's nothing I can do. What can you do if they... River, come on. What can you do if they decide to not diagnose me? And they were like, there's nothing we can do. And I said, so if I don't get a diagnosis, you just dismiss me? And they were like, yeah, we do that if you get diagnosed as well. And I was like, what? And she said, yeah, regardless of the outcome, we just discharge you. And I said, so you don't offer anybody help or like support or therapy? And they said, well, that's not what we're for. And I was like, do you give them information of how to get that? And they said, no. And I was like, so what exactly do you do? I didn't say that to her. But I was thinking, what on earth does this place do? Because regardless of your outcome, you get no support. Like, there is no support for whatever happens. So then I had to spend 6 weeks, 6 anxious weeks, waiting to hear. It was meant to be 2. You're meant to get your report back in 2. But the guy that did my diagnosis went on holiday. And he didn't pass his notes on to anyone. He just went on holiday for 4 weeks. 3 or 4 weeks, so I had to wait longer than usual to get my report and get my diagnosis. And yes, I got it, but let me tell you what he said when he rang me up. So I was on holiday at the time. I was in Cornwall, Bath. I got to Cornwall, and then I was staying with my friend in Bath. I got the phone call at 11 o'clock, and he was like, hi, yeah, so your assessment certainly wasn't one of the standard ones, and you know, I did express that I was really uncomfortable about it, and I've ummed and ahed about whether to give you a diagnosis or not, because I do think you're autistic. Like, I do want to tell you, like, yeah, I do think you're autistic, but I didn't know whether to give you it or not. And I was like, what? I was thinking, this man has straight up just said, yeah, you're autistic, but I didn't know whether to officially give you a diagnosis or not. What? What? Like, the amount of people that I've spoke to online who've said that this is something that they've been through, where a professional has said, yeah, we think you're autistic, but we don't know whether to give you a diagnosis. And I think he said something like, again, whether you're autistic enough to get a diagnosis. And he was like, yeah, so like, how do you feel about that? And I was like, I'm happy. And he was like, oh, okay then. And he was so confused as to why I was happy about being autistic. And this, oh, he just made me feel like he was this professional that worked with autistic people, and he just thought that autism was just this really awful thing that was just going to hold everybody back because they had a diagnosis. And I was just like, I can't be fucked. Like, I can't deal with time and time again speaking to these people who have just got such backwards views about things, and the things that they've studied is based on research that is literally just about like cis boys. And you can understand why it's taken me so long to film this video, because I've just not wanted to talk about it, because it was so draining. It was such a god-awful experience, and this video is not to scare anyone. I'm not making this video to be like trying to put people off getting their diagnosis. It is purely here to stand as, this is what might happen, so that you're prepared, because there's nowhere to really understand how an autism assessment's going to work, because they don't want you to know before you go. It stands here as a comfort, as maybe a, okay, now I know what to expect kind of thing, to prepare yourself, and also as a, look at how fucked the system is. Like, I want my content to be, I want to be transparent about it, because people should know. And I feel like allistic people, neurotypical people, people who don't necessarily understand how the system works, have no understanding of how fucked things are. And people are like, oh, but if a professional says that you're not autistic, then you're clearly not autistic then. That's not how it works. It really is not as clean cut as that, because this man straight up admitted to me that as much as he knew that I was autistic, he thought about not giving me a diagnosis. And that is so fucked. And the amount of people that has happened to, the amount of people that know that they're autistic and a professional just does not recognise it in them because they don't fit the stereotypes that they either want them to fit, or the research that is built off people that don't fit their stereotypes. And it's just, I'm getting angry and worked up about it again, because there are so many things and so many flaws involved in this whole system, and it is sad, and people are being neglected, people are being overlooked, people are being mistreated, and it is so hard because the research takes years to catch up with practice, and this is just going to keep going on and on and on. On and on and on. And no wonder people are late diagnosed, no wonder people have to self-diagnose, because if my story tells you anything, it's that it's traumatic, and it is that you might not come out of it with the outcome that you should have. And that is why self-diagnosis will always be valid. And I know that I'm going to get comments of people being like, you're doing it for attention, or you manipulated that professional into thinking that you're autistic when you're not, or you manipulated them because you complained and they just wanted you to shut up, or you're trying to fit a box that you don't fit into. No, I am not. I just don't fit the conventions and stereotypes that autism has been portrayed as for so many years, and it's just that much harder for people like me. And my heart goes out to the people that are not white cis boys, or that don't fit what they think you should be when it comes to autism. And I hope that you're getting the support that you need, and I hope that if you're going through this process, it's an easier ride than I had. And look after yourself. Please take the time to look after yourself, because you need it. It is not easy. It is not. And don't listen to anybody that belittles you, because you deserve support, and you deserve help, and you deserve a diagnosis. That was a lot. If you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments. I'll either make a part 3 or I will answer them below. Please let me know what kind of content you want to see. And yeah, thanks for watching this video. I know it's been a lot. Probably a lot on your brain as much as it was on mine. But yeah, hopefully see you in my next video. Like, subscribe, turn on the notification bell. Oh, I love saying that. It's so funny. Yeah, hopefully see you in my next video.